Thanks. Yes, Albert. Thank you. Look, they say that a military plan never survives the first shot in the battle. And it's true that the kind of pandemic that I was planning for back in 2004 to 2007 was a flu pandemic. But certainly our planning for a flu pandemic did not at that time include closures of internal borders, closing of businesses, stopping people from leaving their homes, preventing people from visiting others in their homes. None of that. This obviously has been a rather different pandemic. And I can understand why, confronted with footage of the collapse of the Italian hospital system back in early March, there was a degree of public panic and a degree of heightened anxiety amongst policymakers. And I think under the circumstances, lockdowns were probably unavoidable back then. But once we'd had a relatively short and sharp lockdown and had a better handle on the disease, I think we should have proceeded with a lot fewer restrictions on people's daily lives than we in fact have had. I think we have never really been clear about our objective. Was it to flatten the curve? Was it to suppress the illness? Was it to eradicate the illness? And in Australia, without ever really properly debating and deciding the matter, effectively we've got an eradication strategy. Now, you can eradicate the illness if initially, or in the face of any significant outbreaks, you introduce drastic lockdowns and you keep your borders closed more or less indefinitely. I'm not sure that is realistic. Even with the vaccine now in the offing, I doubt that we can really get away for the medium term with a continued eradication strategy. Frankly, once we knew what we were dealing with, I think we should have adopted a management strategy, which was to do our best to protect the vulnerable, to keep the health system functioning, but otherwise to allow people to get on with their lives. Eric, we cannot have another year like the year we've just lived through, which has been corrosive of the human spirit, destructive of human liberties, and disastrous for prosperity. Absolutely catastrophic. Now, again, every death is sad, but an illness which claims people at about the same age that they can be expected to die anyway is not something that we should have turned the world upside down over. If it was Ebola, fair enough, but it's not. In terms of virulence, this pandemic is about on a par with the Hong Kong flu pandemic of the late 1960s and the Asian flu pandemic of the late 1950s. And there was nothing like the economic and social reaction to those that we've had to this. If someone is drowning in the surf, would a brave man leap in or a brave woman leap in to save that person? Of course. If someone is dying in an emergency department, would you mobilise all the resources of the hospital to save that person? Of course. But would you lock down the whole of society for a period of months, maybe even years, to prevent very old and very sick people from being more vulnerable? That's a question that I don't think there is a clear answer to that. We can never allow ourselves to be paralysed by fear. And I really do think that fear and panic has played a far too big a part in policy considerations of this matter. Second thing, yes, we've got to take the experts seriously. We've got to listen to them. We've got to, I suppose, test our policy propositions against their expertise. But in the end, decisions have got to be made by elected, accountable politicians. We can never subcontract out government to unelected, unaccountable experts. And the so-called expert advice, which has driven policy in this country and in so many other countries, it's almost never been fully published. It's almost never been fully tested. And as far as I can work out, for every expert who says lock the joint down, there's another expert who says, well, actually, there are better ways of dealing with this. That's my thought for what it's worth. I suspect that I am deeply out of sympathy with many of my fellow citizens on this, but I don't like the idea that we should live in the fear of death. I think death is part of life, and in the end, what should really scare us is not the prospect of death, but the prospect of not living life to the full in the meantime.